Each year, over 300 big cat attacks are reported worldwide, and many of them end in tragedy. Today, we're diving into the most terrifying big cat attacks ever recorded, from zoos and safaris to people's very own homes. Let's dive right into it. The early morning sun on September 14, 2016 filtered through the dense pine forests, casting long shadows across the quiet rural roads of eastern North Carolina. The air was thick with late summer humidity, and the only sounds to be heard were the Carolina chickadees calling from the treetops. Here, in a secluded town just over 2 hours east of Charlotte, stretches of farmland and woodland separated small communities where neighbors rarely questioned what went on behind closed doors. It was the kind of place where someone could live in near isolation, undisturbed, even if they kept an apex predator in their home. At the edge of one such road, Olivia Carter's house sat tucked away behind a gravel driveway, hidden from view by a dense wall of trees. At 37 years old, Olivia had built a life of independence. She was unmarried, had no children, and worked a remote corporate job that gave her financial stability without the need to leave her property. That same financial freedom had also allowed her to pursue something far more unusual: the private ownership of a wild animal. For the past 2 years, she had shared her home with Kai, a 42-pound African caracal, a species known for its lethal hunting skills, powerful build, and unmatched agility. Unlike most exotic animal owners, Olivia hadn't built a secure outdoor enclosure or kept Kai in a controlled space. He had full reign of the house. She believed their bond made her different from other owners. But on that quiet September morning, Kai would prove that no amount of human care could override the instincts of a predator. Caracals are native to Africa, the Middle East, and parts of Asia, built for hunting with razor-sharp claws, powerful hind legs, and keen predatory instincts. Unlike domesticated cats, caracals retain their wild nature, even when raised from birth. They strike with precision, their bite force strong enough to crush bone, and their coiled muscles give them the ability to leap over 10 feet into the air, a skill designed for taking down birds but just as effective on larger prey. Despite these facts, Olivia never saw Kai as a threat. She had imported him from a breeder outside the US, spending thousands of dollars on transport and veterinary clearances to bring him into North Carolina, a state with no restrictions on owning exotic big cats. Unlike in other states where such animals required permits and inspections, there were no legal barriers, no oversight, and no regulations preventing her from housing a wild predator inside her home. She had raised him from a kitten, treating him like a pet. He lounged on her furniture, followed her from room to room, and slept at the foot of her bed. But there had been signs: aggressive swipes with claws extended, guttural growls when startled, a deep bite that had left a scar on her arm months prior. Friends had warned her that exotic animal experts cautioned against keeping caracals as pets, but Olivia was convinced she understood him better than anyone else could. At 10:15 a.m., Olivia was on a video call with her younger sister Erin Carter, who lived out of the state. Erin later recalled that Olivia had been standing near the kitchen counter chatting casually as she prepared Kai's raw meat breakfast. Kai was pacing nearby, his ears pinned back, tail twitching, a posture Erin had noticed before but never thought much about. Olivia had always joked that he was impatient for food, brushing off concerns, as if Kai's restlessness was nothing more than a quirky habit. Seconds later, everything changed. Kai launched forward without warning, his claws raking deep across Olivia's face before she could react. The phone jolted as Olivia stumbled backwards, screaming, the image blurring with violent movement. Erin's panicked voice rang through the call, but there was no response. Kai latched onto Olivia's arm, his powerful jaws clamping down to the bone. A loud crash echoed through the phone as furniture scraped across the tile floor, Olivia struggling to break free. The phone, knocked from her grasp, landed face up, still transmitting. Erin listened as the sounds of Olivia's struggle filled the call. Screams, heavy breathing, the deep growls of the caracal. She ended the call and immediately dialed 911. The dispatcher answered, but Erin was calling from out of state, and her location routed her to her local emergency services. She quickly explained the situation, but the dispatcher couldn't send help directly. Erin needed to call 911 for Olivia's location. They provided her with the correct 10-digit number for emergency services in North Carolina. Before dialing again, Erin frantically searched her phone for Olivia's address. In her panic, she couldn't recall it immediately, scrolling through old messages and emails until she found it. Only then did she call the emergency services for Olivia's location, relaying the full address. At 10:27 a.m., first responders were finally dispatched to the scene with animal control officers. By the time they arrived, it was already too late. Emergency responders broke through the front door to find Kai still hunched over Olivia's lifeless body, his ears flattened, muscles coiled, fur bristling. He didn't flee, he didn't hide, he was guarding his kill. The animal control officers trained in handling dangerous exotic animals moved in with catch poles and tranquilizer darts. Kai let out a low growl but didn't resist, his instincts still locked in predator mode. As they restrained him, he licked the blood from his muzzle. Erin had already hung up, but when emergency services finally arrived, she received the call she had been dreading. The dispatcher confirmed what she already feared. Olivia was unresponsive. The paramedics and police had entered the house, but there was nothing they could do. Olivia was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner's report confirmed that Olivia suffered fatal blood loss from deep lacerations to her face, arms, and neck. But the final injury had been a bite to the throat that severed her carotid artery. A precision kill, exactly how caracals take down prey in the wild. The story spread quickly, sparking renewed debates over the dangers of private exotic animal ownership. Experts pointed out that while caracals are smaller than big cats, they're still wild animals, with reflexes, strength, and instincts that no human can ever fully control. Still, no legislation was made banning the ownership of such animals. As for Kai, he was transferred to a wildlife sanctuary placed in a secure habitat away from human interaction. Officials ruled that he would not be euthanized, as the attack was deemed a natural predatory response rather than abnormal aggression. On October 3, 2003, Las Vegas was alive with the glittering energy that made it the city of endless entertainment. At the Mirage Hotel and Casino, an audience packed into the theater, ready to witness one of the Strip's most famous acts, Siegfried and Roy. Known for their larger-than-life performances featuring illusions and live exotic animals, the duo had become icons in the entertainment world. Their show, a spectacle of magic and wildlife, had drawn millions over its 13-year run. But this night would mark a devastating turn of events. Siegfried Fischbacher and Roy Horn had captivated audiences for decades, combining Siegfried's intricate illusions with Roy's command over some of nature's most majestic creatures. White tigers were the centerpiece of their act, and none was more famous than Manticore, a 400-pound tiger raised in captivity and integrated into their performances from a young age. For years, Manticore had been a symbol of the bond between man and beast, his presence both awe-inspiring and commanding. That night, he took the stage again alongside Roy under the bright spotlight. The theater was electric as the audience erupted into applause, their focus fixed on the lone stage where Roy appeared with Manticore at his side. The tiger moved with the sleek grace of a predator, its pale fur gleaming under the lights. The act began without issue, the pair moving through the well-rehearsed routine as the crowd sat enthralled. Then, in an unscripted moment, Roy lifted his microphone toward Manticore, instructing the tiger to say hello. Instead, the tiger bit onto Roy's sleeve. Roy responded by tapping Manticore on the nose with the microphone, a signal intended to correct the behavior. Manticore released the sleeve but did not retreat. Seconds later, the tiger lunged, knocking Roy to the ground. The audience gasped as the spotlight illuminated the tiger pinning Roy with its massive paws. A hushed confusion swept over the theater, with some unsure whether the unfolding scene was part of the act or a shocking break from the illusion. Manticore's jaws clamped onto Roy's neck, dragging him across the stage. The sound of gasps and cries began to rise from the crowd. Trainers rushed in, spraying fire extinguishers and shouting commands, attempting to break Manticore's grip. Their efforts were met with resistance as the tiger pulled Roy further, its strength overwhelming the attempts to subdue it. Blood pooled on the stage, visible even under the harsh stage lights. Siegfried appeared, shouting commands as the trainers escalated their efforts, using the butt of a fire extinguisher to strike the tiger's head. After what seemed like an eternity, Manticore finally released Roy and retreated. The trainers immediately carried Roy backstage, where he lay motionless. Emergency responders arrived swiftly, working to stop the bleeding as Roy was rushed to University Medical Center. His injuries were severe: a crushed windpipe, a severed jugular vein, and a damaged vertebra. He had lost a massive amount of blood, and his condition was critical. News of the attack spread quickly, sending shockwaves through Las Vegas and beyond. The Mirage Theater, once filled with cheers and applause, was now eerily silent, its audience left stunned. Manticore was quickly secured and returned to his enclosure, but the damage was done. The attack ended not just the night's performance, but the entire run of Siegfried and Roy's iconic show. Surgeons worked tirelessly to save Roy's life. During the procedure, he suffered multiple cardiac arrests, and part of his skull was removed to relieve swelling in his brain. Despite the odds, Roy survived, though the attack left him permanently impaired. He lost much of his motor function, and his ability to speak was severely diminished. The incident ignited a firestorm of controversy. The U.S. Department of Agriculture launched an investigation into the attack, while animal rights groups renewed calls to retire performing animals. Speculation about what caused Manticore's behavior ranged from claims of a stroke suffered by Roy during the performance to allegations of mishandling. Roy himself later stated that Manticore had been attempting to protect him, though this explanation was met with skepticism. Others pointed to the inherent risks of working with wild animals, even those raised in captivity. Manticore remained under the care of Siegfried and Roy until his death in 2014. The duo, though retired from regular performances, made a brief return to the stage in 2009 for a final act, a gesture of closure to their illustrious career. Roy continued to live at the Jungle Palace, surrounded by the animals he had devoted his life to. In 2020, he passed away after battling a severe illness, leaving behind a legacy marked by wonder, risk, and the unbreakable allure of the magic they created. The attack remains one of the most infamous moments in entertainment history. It demonstrated the fine line performers walk when blending illusion with the extreme power of wild animals. On a cold, blustery day in January of 1872, the town of Bolton, England stirred with anticipation. Smoke billowed from chimneys, mingled with the overcast sky as townsfolk navigated the cobblestone streets, scarves pulled tightly against the winter chill. Near the town hall, a large canvas tent towered over the square, its vibrant banners promising a thrilling spectacle. Inside, the flickering glow of gas lamps lit the interior of Mander's Menagerie, where 500 spectators had gathered to witness one of the most daring performances of the era, Maserati the Lion Tamer. Thomas McCarthy, known by his stage name Maserati, was the star of the evening. A seasoned performer, he had spent years traveling with menageries, building a reputation as a fearless showman. Dressed in a Roman gladiator-inspired costume, he prepared to face 3 lions in a display of dominance and control. Armed with only a whip and a thin sword, he would command the animals to leap through hoops, sit on pedestals, and follow his every cue. For the audience, the act was a mesmerizing blend of danger and artistry. But for the man in the cage, it was a high-stakes dance with unpredictable predators. The lions, majestic and imposing, were among the menagerie's most prized animals. The largest, a black-maned lion from North Africa, was a particularly striking figure. Its muscular frame and sharp amber eyes exuded raw power, a reminder that no amount of training could fully subdue the wild instincts of such a beast. Life in captivity, coupled with the loud and chaotic atmosphere of the performances, often left the animals tense and unpredictable. As Maserati stepped into the cage, the crowd erupted in cheers. The lions moved cautiously under the gaslight, their paws sinking into the sawdust-covered floor. Cracking his whip, Maserati commanded the first lion to leap through a hoop, earning applause from the audience. The second lion followed, crouching low on a pedestal at his signal. But as he turned to the black-maned lion, it hesitated, a low growl rumbling from the deep within its chest. The sound carried across the tent, drawing a hushed murmur from the spectators. Maserati cracked his whip again, the sharp sound cutting through the heavy air. The lion's growl deepened, and it took a single step forward, its body tense and poised. The audience leaned in, unsure if this was part of the act or something more sinister. Then, in an instant, the lion lunged. Its massive body collided with Maserati, sending him sprawling to the ground. The audience gasped, some believing it was still part of the performance. But as the lion's teeth sank into his shoulder, blood stained the sawdust, and the reality of the situation became horrifyingly clear. The other 2 lions, spurred by the commotion, joined the attack. Their claws raked across Maserati's chest and arms as they circled their fallen trainer. The tent erupted in chaos. Spectators screamed, some fainting, others rushing toward the exits in a frantic attempt to escape. Handlers dashed to the cage, wielding iron bars in a desperate effort to drive the lions back. The gas lamps flickered as shouts and roars filled the air. For several agonizing minutes, the handlers fought to subdue the lions. They struck at the animals with iron bars, attempting to create enough distance to reach Maserati, who had been dragged deeper into the cage. By the time they managed to pull him out, his body was severely mauled, his costume soaked in blood. He was barely alive, his breathing shallow. Witnesses later claimed he tried to speak, his lips moving faintly, but no words came. He succumbed to his injuries shortly after being carried from the tent. The attack left the crowd in shock, and news of the tragedy quickly spread across England. Newspapers chronicled the grisly details, sparking debates over the ethics of lion taming and the treatment of wild animals in captivity. Victorian society, captivated by the spectacle of such performances, was forced to confront the deadly risks faced by the trainers and the animals alike. The lion responsible for the attack, later dubbed Macarte's lion, became infamous. After its natural death in 1874, the lion was preserved by the taxidermist Roland Ward and displayed in London, where it drew large crowds of curious onlookers. Maserati was buried in the Roman Catholic section of Tongay Cemetery in Bolton, where a white marble cross was erected in his memory. The inscription commemorates the life and bravery of a man who lived and ultimately died on the edge of human ambition and untamed wilderness. His tragic story remains one of the most infamous accounts in circus history, a chilling reminder of the volatile balance between spectacle and survival. In the heart of Uzbekistan, where ancient silk roads once carried treasures between east and west, lies a modern city struggling to maintain its aging institutions. Among them, a Soviet-era zoo where magnificent beasts paced behind weathered bars, and where one man's desire to impress would lead to his devastating end. Farouk Ariskalov had worked at the city zoo for over 15 years, his callous hands and weathered face telling the story of countless days spent tending to the facility's residents. At 44, he was neither young nor old, but experienced enough to know better than to do what he was about to attempt. His monthly salary of 15,000 tenge, roughly $35, barely covered his basic needs. But it was his new relationship that made him yearn for something more impressive than being just another underpaid zookeeper. Marina, his girlfriend of 3 months, had captured his heart with her youth and vitality. At 28, she was significantly younger than Farouk, and her constant social media presence made him increasingly aware of the gulf between their worlds. She would often show him viral videos of other zookeepers interacting with their animals, asking why he had never shared such exciting content of his own work. The lion enclosure had always been the zoo's main attraction. 3 magnificent African lions, 1 male and 2 females, had been born in captivity and raised at the facility. The male, whom the staff called Sultan, was particularly impressive with his full mane and powerful build. Despite their captivating upbringing, these were not tame animals, something Farouk knew all too well from years of careful feeding and cleaning routines. On that fateful morning in December 2024, before the zoo opened to the public, Farouk arrived earlier than usual. The sun had barely risen over the Soviet bloc buildings surrounding the zoo, and a light frost still covered the ground. His colleagues would later recall how he had seemed distracted lately, constantly checking his phone and talking about his new relationship. What Farouk didn't realize was that these apex predators, despite years of captivity, retained every instinct of their wild ancestors. African lions capable of bringing down prey weighing up to 1,000 pounds possess jaw strength measuring 1,000 pounds per square inch. A single swipe of their paw can crush a human skull, and their territorial instincts remain as sharp as their 4-inch canines. The footage recovered from Farouk's phone would later reveal his final moments. He approached the enclosure with his phone held high around 5 a.m., recording himself as he spoke to the lions in the enclosure. The animals, usually still drowsy at this hour, began to stir as he drew closer. Then, in a decision that would prove fatal, he did the unthinkable. He entered through the service door. The attack was immediate and devastating. Sultan, the male lion, initially remained still, watching as Farouk approached. Moments later, he moved toward the zookeeper, followed by the 2 lionesses. One of the lions eventually clamped its jaws down on Farouk's arm. His phone, still recording, captured his first screams before being knocked from his grip. With over 800 pounds of muscle and raw power bearing down on him, any chance of escape vanished. The lions continued their attack, overpowering him with ease. There was no one else present at that early hour. Farouk had entered the enclosure alone, and the zoo had not yet opened for the day. His absence was only noticed when the other employees arrived later that morning, and by then it was far too late. Zoo staff rushed to the lion exhibit once they realized something was wrong, but by then the lions had already mauled him beyond saving. It took animal control officers over an hour to secure the enclosure before they could recover his remains. His phone was later found several feet away, its screen shattered but its recording intact, preserving the horrific final moments of his life. The tragedy quickly gained international attention, with media outlets worldwide reporting on the shocking incident. News platforms highlighted growing concerns over zoo safety protocols and the dangers of close human interaction with wild animals. The footage of Farouk's final moments, which surfaced online, became a focal point of discussion about the risks zookeepers face, fueling debates on whether stricter regulations should be implemented. July 14, 2012 was a sunny Saturday in rural Sao Paulo state, Brazil. The midday heat hung heavy over the red clay roads and palm-lined fields outside Itataba, a quiet town known more for its sugarcane farms than for tourism. But nestled just beyond the city limits was a small, privately owned wildlife park called Recontro Animal, known to locals as a place to see exotic animals up close, often too close. Recontro Animal had opened in 1999 as a family-run attraction, originally featuring rescued farm animals and native wildlife. Over the years, it expanded rapidly, adding exotic species like big cats, primates, and reptiles, without the infrastructure or oversight of larger, accredited facilities. The park relied heavily on tourism and weekend visitors, promoting a more intimate experience than traditional zoos. While it had avoided major incidents in the past, its safety practices had been quietly criticized by animal welfare groups for years, citing minimal staff training, outdated enclosures, and poor emergency planning. That morning, Maya Santana, a 34-year-old school administrator from Campinas, arrived at the facility with her husband and 2 young children. The visit had been a long-promised outing, planned loosely over the previous month but finalized only the day before as a way to celebrate their daughter Clara's 7th birthday. With a busy school year behind them and Maya's schedule often full, the family hadn't had many chances for a day trip together. Maya had found the park online through a local parent group and was drawn to its promise of hands-on enclosures, close-up animal viewing, and a relaxed, family-friendly environment. Something simple and memorable for her children to enjoy. Maya was known for being careful and practical, a loving mother and a respected figure in her community. At her elementary school, she was the kind of person teachers turned to for advice and parents trusted without exception. She didn't take risks and was often described as level-headed and responsible. Her decision to visit Recontro Animal had been thoroughly researched, or so she thought. The facility was small, less than 10 acres, but packed with big attractions: monkeys, pumas, leopards, and even a full-grown Bengal tiger. But the highlight was its pair of African lions, housed in a large open enclosure with a raised wooden viewing deck above. The design gave guests a clear overhead view of the lions below, separated by a roughly 10-foot drop and a reinforced fence that extended around the perimeter of the habitat. At 1:45 p.m., after lunch in the shaded picnic area, Maya and her family joined a group of other visitors along the elevated platform above the lion habitat. The wooden railing at the edge of the deck was built to standard height, but there were no additional safety barriers or netting to prevent accidents. Several children pressed up against the railing to get a better look at the lions. The African lion is one of the most iconic predators on Earth. Social, territorial, and built for strength. Adult males can weigh over 500 pounds and possess a bite force of roughly 650 pounds per square inch, capable of breaking bone with ease. A lion's primary hunting tools are its sheer muscle, retractable claws, and powerful jaws, which it uses to suffocate or disable prey. Though lions in captivity lack the need to hunt, their instincts remain intact, and any perceived intrusion into their territory can trigger immediate violent response. Unlike big cats that prefer stealth, lions are known for their explosive attacks, fast, overpowering, and designed to end a struggle quickly. Clara climbed onto the lower beam of the railing, attempting to see over and down into the enclosure where Nero, a 6-year-old male lion, was lying in partial shade. Maya stepped forward and reached for her daughter's waist to pull her down. In doing so, her foot slipped on the worn wooden planks and she lost her balance. With nothing to hold on to, Maya tipped forward and fell over the railing, landing hard inside the enclosure below. The fall was approximately 18 feet. Maya struck the ground on her left side, fracturing her pelvis and stunning her on impact. For several seconds, she remained motionless. Nero rose to his feet almost immediately, his attention drawn to the sudden movement and sound. As Maya tried to sit up, Nero approached, closing the distance in seconds. He struck her across the back with a full-force swipe of his paw, knocking her face first into the dirt. The impact tore through skin and muscle, leaving deep lacerations across her shoulder and ribs. As she tried to crawl away, he bit down on the back of her neck, dragging her deeper into the enclosure. The lion began to treat her exactly as he would prey in the wild. He used his powerful forelimbs to pin her to the ground, repositioning his grip to bite into her shoulder and upper back. Then, with violent force, he raked downward with his hind legs, tearing through fabric and flesh in a defensive feeding behavior known as bunny kicking. Nero's jaws clamped around the base of her neck again, compressing her spine. As blood soaked into the dry dirt, he bit into her upper thigh, tearing tissue from the muscle in an attempt to reach the femoral artery. Maya had lost consciousness within moments of the mauling, but Nero continued the attack as if she were still struggling. Above, the viewing platform was in chaos. Guests screamed and pulled their children back from the railing. Staff arrived with poles, fire extinguishers, and tranquilizer rifles. At 1:52 p.m., the first dart struck Nero's hindquarters, but the lion did not retreat. He dragged Maya several feet before a second dart hit, slowing his movements. It took nearly 5 minutes for the sedatives to fully take effect, causing Nero to collapse near the rock ledge. Emergency responders arrived at 2:04 p.m., entering the enclosure once it was declared safe. Paramedics assessed Maya at the scene and found no signs of life. She was pronounced dead at 2:11 p.m. The autopsy confirmed the extent of the trauma: a severed vertebral artery, multiple fractured ribs, a shattered pelvis, and deep lacerations across her torso and limbs. The cause of death was listed as exsanguination due to cervical trauma, consistent with both the fall and the lion's attack. News of the incident spread rapidly across Brazil, prompting a nationwide outcry over lax safety at Recanto Animal. Within days, state investigators launched a formal inquiry, uncovering a series of violations that raised serious concerns about the park's operations. These included unreinforced railings along elevated platforms, a lack of secondary containment around high-risk enclosures, insufficient signage, and an absence of trained emergency personnel on site. Surveillance footage and eyewitness reports confirm that the fall had occurred due to preventable structural shortcomings, and officials concluded that the facility had failed to provide adequate safeguards for visitors. While the incident was officially classified as an accident, the zoo was found to be negligent in maintaining basic safety standards. Recanto Animal was temporarily shut down, fined by local authorities, and ordered to complete a full overhaul of its safety protocols before reopening to the public. Nero, the lion involved in the attack, was placed under observation and was later transferred to a wildlife sanctuary in Rio Grande do Sul, where he would live out the rest of his life with no further contact with the public. Zoo officials stated that the lion had acted on instinct and would not be euthanized. Maya's death sent shockwaves through the community. Her school held a memorial service attended by hundreds of students, families, and colleagues. She was remembered not for the tragic way she died, but for her compassion, leadership, and unwavering commitment to children. Her story later became a case study cited in several safety reform initiatives targeting private zoological facilities across Brazil. Picture yourself in the heart of South Africa's wilderness, where the roar of lions reverberates through the air, mingling with the rustle of wild grasses and distant calls of other creatures. This was the world of Leon van Biljon, known to many as the Lion Man, built from the ground up. In 1985, Leon and his family moved to what was then just open land. Over the years, he transformed it into Mahala View Lion Lodge, a haven for both wildlife and guests. His children grew up surrounded by this vast sanctuary, and by 2006, he had brought in 3 lion cubs, Rambo, Katrin, and Nikita, raising them as if they were his own. Day and night, he stayed by their side, sometimes even sleeping in their enclosure to form a bond as close as family. These lions weren't just exhibits, they were family. Known for his lion walking tours and impassioned talks, Leon dedicated his life to educating visitors, sharing his unique relationship with these powerful predators. Now in his 70s, he moved with ease among the animals he trusted deeply, never imagining the wilderness he knew so well could turn against him in a single moment. On the morning of August 20th, 2019, Leon entered the lion enclosure as he had countless times before, unaware that a mundane trip through the gate would lead to his final moments. The lions were used to his presence. To them, he was part of their world. That day, however, he had a task: repairing a section of the perimeter fence that needed attention. He opened the security gate and stepped inside, calm and sure of himself, the same way he had hundreds of times. He moved confidently, the lions watching as he set his tools down and began inspecting the damaged fence. But then he did something he rarely did. He turned his back to the animals. As Leon crouched down to inspect the fence, everything seemed routine. The lions, Rambo, Katrin, and Nikita, were lounging nearby, watching him in silence, their massive paws resting against the earth. But crouching down with his back turned was a rare sight for them, and the movement seemed to spark a change. One of the lions began to close in, each step silent, the powerful muscles rippling under its coat. Its gaze locked on Leon, who remained oblivious, focused solely on his task. Then, in a flash, the lion sprang forward, covering the distance in seconds. The massive paws dug into the dirt, propelling its heavy frame through the air. Leon, crouched and unaware, was knocked forward as the lion's full weight struck him from behind. He barely had a second to react before the lion's powerful jaws clamped around his neck. The teeth, razor sharp and built to crush, severed arteries and tore through muscle in an instant. The impact and grip were swift and unyielding. For a moment, Leon's body tensed, his limbs reflexively reacting to the attack. But the power of the lion's bite overwhelmed him, rendering him helpless. The lion's head shook instinctively, its hold tightening as it applied hundreds of pounds of bite force, pinning Leon to the ground. Nearby, the other lions rose, drawn by the commotion, their eyes fixed on the scene as their companion asserted dominance over what had once been a familiar figure in their territory. Staff arrived moments later, drawn by Leon's last faint cry. From outside the enclosure, they saw the horrifying scene: a lion standing over Leon's body, its mouth red with blood, while the other two lions circled with an unsettling calm. Realizing the severity of the situation, they immediately contacted emergency responders, knowing any attempt to intervene could turn deadly. As emergency teams arrived, the response was swift but calculated. To secure the area and prevent further tragedy, two of the lions, including Rambo, were shot. The third lion, however, was tranquilized rather than killed, allowing paramedics safe access to Leon's body. In the end, all three lions were euthanized, a heartbreaking conclusion that showed the intense risks of working so closely with powerful predators. As news of Leon's death spread, it resonated deeply within the community. Leon Van Biljorn wasn't just any lion keeper, he was known affectionately as the Lion Man, a title he earned through years of dedicated care and deep connection with the big cats he raised from cubs. His lions were more than mere animals, they were his companions, his children, and he had devoted years to their upbringing and to educating visitors about their importance in the ecosystem. For the staff, the sight of the enclosure without Leon and his lions marked an end of an era at Mahala View, which had been Leon's life's work. The reserve continued operating, though under new management, and with increased caution around the lions still in residence. In the days following the incident, both local and international observers considered the risks of close human-animal interactions. Though his family grieved deeply, they found some peace in knowing he lived and passed away in the presence of the animals he cherished. As Leon's story shows, even the closest bonds with wildlife can shatter in an instant, revealing the unpredictable nature that lies within every predator. Decades of trust unraveled in a single moment, leaving Leon to face the instincts he had spent his life respecting. On a warm evening in the summer of 1985, the circus tent in Quakertown, Pennsylvania, was alive with energy. Families from the small town and nearby communities gathered under its towering red and white stripes, drawn by the promise of daring performances and unforgettable sights. Inside, the scent of sawdust mingled with the buttery aroma of popcorn, and the electric lights overhead cast a soft glow on the packed rows of benches. Children sat wide-eyed, clutching their snacks as the ringmaster announced the evening's highlight, a breathtaking display of human skill and animal power. At the center of it all was Manuel Jr. Ruffin, a charismatic lion tamer with years of experience. His confidence and charm commanded the crowd's attention as he prepared to enter the cage with 3 majestic lions. Beneath the excitement, however, a quiet tension hung in the air, a reminder of the inherent danger that came with facing such powerful creatures. Ruffin was no ordinary performer. Born Emmanuel Ruffin in Mississippi in 1938, he had joined the Clyde Beatty Railroad Circus at the age of 13, quickly becoming the student of legendary animal trainer Clyde Beatty. Under Beatty's mentorship, Ruffin developed a reputation as a fearless showman, earning the nickname Prince Bogino for his elegant and daring performances. Over the years, he became known for his ability to command lions and tigers with apparent ease, mastering tricks that showcased their innate power while emphasizing his control. Despite the inherent risks of his profession, Ruffin believed his bond with the animals minimized danger, a confidence that set him apart from many of his peers. The act that night was one Ruffin had performed countless times before. He would enter the cage with 3 lions, guiding them through a series of precise movements, leaping over barriers, balancing on stools, and responding to his verbal and physical cues. The performance required perfect timing and unwavering focus, but Ruffin's years of experience made it seem effortless. As he entered the cage, cracking his whip and gesturing confidently, the audience erupted in applause. The lions, massive and powerful, moved deliberately as they took their positions. Their golden coats gleamed under the lights, and their piercing eyes followed Ruffin's every move. The routine began smoothly. One lion leapt gracefully over a low barrier, landing with a thud that reverberated through the tent. Another balanced on a stool, its muscles rippling as it obeyed Ruffin's commands. The third lion paced slightly before settling into position, completing the trio. The crowd watched in awe as Ruffin demonstrated his mastery over the animals, directing them with a combination of sharp commands and precise gestures. For the audience, it was a mesmerizing display of courage and coordination. But as the performance continued, one of the lions began to behave erratically. It hesitated during a cue, its posture shifting into something more rigid. Ruffin cracked his whip, a sharp signal to refocus the animal, but the lion remained tense. Its low growl cut through the noise of the crowd, drawing a murmur of uncertainty from the spectators. Ruffin stepped closer, issuing another command. For a moment, the lion froze, its body coiled with tension. Without warning, the lion pounced. Its massive frame collided with Ruffin, knocking him off his feet. Gasps rippled through the audience as the lion clamped its powerful jaws around Ruffin's leg, dragging him across the floor. Gasps turned to horrified cries as the trainer struggled against the lion's immense strength. The sight of blood spreading across the sawdust shattered the momentary stillness, and panic swept through the tent as the lion's growls grew louder and its movements more aggressive. As Ruffin struggled to free himself, a second lion joined the attack. It leapt on his torso, pinning him to the ground, while swiping at his chest and neck with its claws. The trainer's bright costume was quickly soaked in blood, and his attempts to fend off the animals grew weaker with each passing moment. Panic rippled through the tent. Some parents instinctively shielded their children, clutching them tightly as they backed away from the ring. Others bolted for the exits, their hurried movements adding to the confusion. Those still seated sat frozen, their faces pale and eyes wide, unable to look away from the horrifying scene unfolding before them. Circus workers hurried into the cage equipped with whatever they could grab to intervene, their urgent movements focused on breaking the lion's attention. They shouted and struck at the lions, attempting to create enough of a distraction to pull Ruffin to safety. The lions roared in defiance, their primal instincts fully unleashed. After several agonizing minutes, the workers managed to drive the animals back, clearing a path to reach Ruffin. Two handlers dragged him out of the cage, his body limp and covered in deep wounds. Despite the quick response, Ruffin's injuries were catastrophic. The lions had inflicted severe trauma to his leg, chest, and neck, causing massive blood loss. Medical personnel arrived at the scene and worked desperately to stabilize him, but their efforts were in vain. Ruffin succumbed to his injuries shortly after the attack, leaving the circus tent eerily quiet in the wake of the tragedy. Ruffin's death shocked the circus world, where he was both admired and respected for his skill and showmanship. Trainers who knew him spoke of his dedication and the unique connection he shared with the animals he worked with. Yet, the incident highlighted the unpredictable nature of wild animals, regardless of the bond a trainer believed they had built. The lions, despite years of captivity and training, remained powerful predators, capable of reverting to their instincts in an instant. While the lions involved in the attack were spared euthanasia, their futures remained uncertain. The circus industry itself began to feel the weight of increased scrutiny following Ruffin's death. Trainers revisited their safety protocols, and some questioned whether performances with large predators could ever truly be made safe. The tragedy added fuel to ongoing debates about the ethical implications of using wild animals in entertainment, though for many it was a risk inseparable from the spectacle of the circus. April 9, 2013 was a warm and humid evening in Belo Horizonte, Brazil. As the sun dipped behind the city skyline, its golden light cast long shadows over the Belo Horizonte Zoo, one of the largest zoological parks in the country. The day had been uneventful, with families and school groups visiting the exhibits before making their way to the exits. By 6 p.m., closing announcements echoed over the intercom, urging guests to leave. Among the visitors that day was Gabriel Ferreira, a 32-year-old community volunteer and former athlete. He had arrived at the zoo alone, purchasing his ticket at 3:20 p.m. Security footage later showed him moving from one enclosure to another, pausing occasionally to observe the animals. Unlike most guests, he didn't take photos or linger at the popular exhibits. As the zoo emptied and the gates locked at 7 p.m., Gabriel was nowhere to be seen. Gabriel Ferreira was well known and well liked in his neighborhood of Pampulha, a district near the zoo. A former semi-professional football player, he had once been a promising athlete, playing as a midfielder for a local club. However, a knee injury at age 26 had ended his career prematurely. The transition had been difficult, but rather than drift aimlessly, Gabriel had poured himself into his community. For the past 5 years, he had worked at a youth center coaching underprivileged kids in football. He helped organize tournaments, secure funding for equipment, and mentor young athletes who, like him, had dreams of making it to the professional leagues. His passion wasn't just the sport, it was the kids who looked up to him. Outside of coaching, he was an active member of local charity projects. He helped with food drives, volunteered at a homeless shelter, and even assisted in an animal rescue group. By all accounts, he was a man who gave more than he took, which made what happened that night all the more shocking. Among the many animals Gabriel had passed that afternoon, none were more dangerous than the one he would later encounter. The jaguar, Panthera onca, is South America's apex predator and one of the most powerful big cats in the world. Unlike lions and tigers, which suffocate their prey, jaguars use bone-crushing bites, their canines puncturing directly through skulls. Their bite force of over 1,500 psi makes them capable of breaking through turtle shells, thick bones, and even reinforced cages. Jaguars are also silent hunters, known for stalking prey before attacking with sudden explosive force. In the wild, they hunt capybaras, caimans, and even cattle. In captivity, their instincts remain intact, making them one of the most unpredictable predators in zoos. At Belo Horizonte Zoo, the most famous jaguar was Django, a 6-year-old male weighing over 240 pounds. His enclosure was built to mimic the dense forest of his natural habitat, featuring thick foliage, rocky terrain, and a water feature. What led Gabriel to scale its walls remains a mystery. At 8:10 p.m., an hour after the zoo had closed, Gabriel emerged from a concealed spot near the big cat enclosures. His clothing was covered in dirt, suggesting he had been lying low for some time. Security footage later revealed that he had hidden inside a restroom near the reptile house, avoiding detection as the last visitors left. Making his way to the jaguar habitat, he stood near the outer fence for several minutes, seemingly assessing the enclosure. No one knows what he was thinking. The jaguar enclosure was surrounded by 2 barriers, a 10-foot chain-link fence with barbed wire and a 15-foot concrete wall behind it. Scaling them was no easy feat. At 8:27 p.m., he began climbing. Using the metal framework of the fence, he pulled himself up, maneuvering carefully to avoid the barbed wire. The climb took nearly 4 minutes, after which he dropped down between the 2 barriers. At 8:35 p.m., he scaled the concrete wall, using footholds in the rough surface to hoist himself up. He reached the top at 8:39 p.m. and sat there motionless, his figure barely visible against the dimly lit habitat. Then, at 8:42 p.m., he lowered himself into the enclosure. The soft dirt shifted as Gabriel landed inside the habitat. He took a step forward, his posture relaxed. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, from the far side of the enclosure, Django moved. Jaguars are masters of stealth, and Django had been watching from the darkness. As Gabriel stepped closer, the jaguar reacted. In 3 seconds, Django closed the distance, launching himself from the shadows with terrifying speed. Gabriel barely had time to turn before the jaguar slammed into him, knocking him off his feet. As he hit the ground, Django's claws clamped onto his skull. Jaguars don't waste time with suffocation. Their instinct is to kill instantly. Django bit down harder, and a sickening crack echoed through the enclosure. Gabriel's body went limp, but the attack wasn't over. Still locked onto his skull, Django dragged him deeper into the enclosure, disappearing into the dense foliage. At 9:20 p.m. during a routine patrol, security guard Luis Antunes noticed movement in the jaguar enclosure. At first, he assumed Django was just active for the night. Then he saw the blood. Luis's flashlight beam landed on a horrifying scene. A mangled body partially hidden in the undergrowth. Django stood over it, his muzzle dripping with fresh blood. At the sight of the scene, Luis immediately reached for his radio and reported the emergency. Within minutes, additional zoo staff arrived at the jaguar enclosure, carrying tranquilizer rifles and equipment to separate the animal from the body. Django remained near Gabriel's remains, his posture low, muscles tense. When keepers attempted to distract him with food, he didn't respond. One of the staff fired a tranquilizer dart, striking him in the hindquarters. The jaguar reacted with a brief snarl, ears pinned back, but did not immediately move. Within minutes, the sedative took effect, and Django sluggishly retreated into the dense foliage at the back of the enclosure. Once the animal was no longer an immediate threat, zoo staff unlocked a service gate at the rear of the enclosure, allowing emergency personnel inside. 2 paramedics along with a police officer entered first, carrying medical equipment. Their flashlights illuminated the ground, revealing disturbed earth, torn clothing, and bloodstains in the sand. Gabriel's body lay motionless, partially concealed by undergrowth. His injuries were severe, his skull visibly fractured and his limbs unnaturally positioned. There was no movement. At 9:35 p.m., paramedics conducted a brief examination before covering the body with a white sheet. 2 additional responders entered with a stretcher, and together they carefully lifted Gabriel's remains and carried him through the enclosure's rear gate to a waiting ambulance. Its red and blue lights flashed against the concrete walls of the enclosure as law enforcement arrived to secure the scene. Gabriel's autopsy confirmed that his skull had been crushed with severe trauma to the brain. His body bore deep bite wounds and claw lacerations, but the fatal injury had been the first bite. His death shocked the community. The kids he coached at the youth center were devastated, struggling to understand why their mentor, who had always taught them about discipline and safety, had done something so reckless. His family refused to believe it was intentional. His brother insisted Gabriel was not the kind of person to take such risks, but no one could explain why he had gone into that enclosure. Meanwhile, Belo Horizonte Zoo faced scrutiny, but officials maintained that security protocols had been followed, as the barriers met safety standards and there was no containment failure. Django remained at the zoo as he had acted on instinct and posed no ongoing threat. After a mandatory observation period during which zookeepers monitored his behavior, he was returned to his normal routine. While some questioned whether he should remain on display, the incident was ultimately deemed the result of human trespassing rather than a lapse in zoo security. Diana Hansen, a 24-year-old intern, was living her dream at a big cat wildlife park. Her lifelong fascination with lions had brought her here, allowing her to be closer than ever to the majestic creatures she admired. But in one tragic, unpredictable moment, this connection to the animals she loved took a deadly turn, a moment no one could have anticipated. From the tender age of 3, Diana was captivated by big cats, lions, tigers, cheetahs, and leopards. Her fascination led her to pursue a degree in biology at Western Washington University, where she gained hands-on experience working with these magnificent creatures. In January 2013, at 24 years old, Diana embarked on a 6-month internship at Project Survival's Cat Haven in Dunlap, California. This 100-acre sanctuary, home to tigers, leopards, and other endangered big cats, was a haven for her aspirations. Diana's enthusiasm was infectious. She often created songs for each cat, endearing herself to both the animals and her colleagues. Her father, Paul Hansen, recalled her excitement during a tour she gave him, introducing him to Couscous, a 4-year-old male African lion weighing 500 pounds whom she adored. On March 6, 2013, the quiet of early morning settled over Cat Haven, a sanctuary sprawling across 100 acres of rolling California foothills. Sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows over the enclosures lined with tall grass and scattered rocks where big cats roamed. The air was cool and still, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or distant bird call. Diana moved along the winding paths in a golf buggy, her routine well rehearsed, carrying supplies for feeding and cleaning each enclosure. The park owner, Dale Anderson, was away for the day, taking a cheetah to a local school as part of an outreach program. Left behind were Diana and another staff member, Meg Pauls, tasked with caring for the sanctuary's many residents, their movements the only sign of life amid the morning's calm. The day followed a familiar routine. Both staff members were assigned to separate sections of the park, handling the tasks independently and meeting up at the end of their route. This setup was standard, allowing them to work efficiently across the sanctuary's 100 acres. Diana, confident and focused, continued on her path, handling each task with the precision and commitment she'd developed over her months at Cat Haven. But as the morning unfolded, the routine would take an unexpected and tragic turn. Later that afternoon, Diana approached Couscous's enclosure, ready to clean as part of her usual routine. She separated the lion into a smaller holding area with a partition gate, a standard step in ensuring her safety while she worked in the main enclosure. Couscous, familiar with this practice, moved calmly into the confined section. The 4-year-old lion, raised at Cat Haven since he was just 8 weeks old, had become a fixture at the sanctuary. But today, as Diana focused on her tasks, something critical went unnoticed. The partition gate holding Couscous hadn't latched securely. While Diana was sweeping the enclosure floor, Couscous noticed the unlatched gate. He nudged it with his powerful paw, testing the barrier, and it swung open. The 500-pound lion took a step forward, now just feet from Diana, his powerful muscles rippling under his golden coat as he silently approached. Diana, still focused on her work, was completely unaware of the danger closing in behind her. In one swift moment, Couscous closed the distance and swiped at Diana with a single powerful paw, knocking her to the ground. The impact alone from a lion of his size and strength was fatal, breaking her neck instantly. The strike was delivered with the same force he might have used in the wild to take down prey like an antelope. With Diana motionless on the ground, Couscous continued to circle her, curious and perhaps playfully nudging her, a behavior that might be seen as routine interaction among his pride in the wild. But here in the enclosure, it was a haunting scene. Meg, stationed in another part of the park, called out to Diana over the radio. When there was no response, she finished her tasks, expecting to meet up with Diana as usual. But as she waited, Diana was nowhere to be seen. Concerned, Meg climbed into her golf buggy and drove toward the lion enclosure, where she spotted Diana's own buggy parked nearby. A chill ran through her as she saw Diana lying on the ground near a bush, with Couscous standing close by, occasionally nudging her motionless form. Meg's heart raced. Diana looked like she had fainted, but Couscous was outside his usual pen. She approached carefully, speaking calmly to the lion, hoping to keep him at a distance, while quickly reaching for her radio to call for help. She called for emergency help, and within minutes, responders from the Fresno County Sheriff's Office arrived, strategizing a way to separate the lion from Diana's body. Couscous, however, had grown defensive, blocking anyone who attempted to enter. Efforts to distract him with food failed as he lunged at officers approaching the enclosure. Ultimately, they made the difficult decision to shoot Couscous to ensure safe access to Diana. It was only after the enclosure was secured that responders could reach Diana, but it was already too late. Her injuries had been instantaneous and fatal, leaving a profound impact on her family, colleagues, and everyone at the sanctuary. Diana's dedication to the big cats defined her life, from her childhood fascination to her work in California's Cat Haven, where her passion grew into expertise. She understood these animals and respected their untamed instincts. Yet that day, a single misstep turned her sanctuary into a scene of tragedy, a reminder of the line between fascination and danger. Her family took comfort in knowing she'd spent her life doing what she loved most, working with the creatures that had captured her heart. On February 2, 2013, the Suarez Brothers Circus set up its grand tent in the small town of Echochoa, Sonora, Mexico. The arrival of the circus was a highlight for the local community, a chance for families to experience the wonder and thrill of live performances under the bright light of the big top. Among the performers that evening was Alexander Crispin Suarez, a 35-year-old animal trainer whose daring acts with Bengal tigers were the centerpiece of the show. Known for his mastery and precision, Alexander's work brought audiences to their feet with every performance. But this night would mark the end of his career in the most devastating way. Alexander came from a family forged in circus tradition. His life had been shaped by the nomadic lifestyle and long days of rigorous practice that define the world of performance art. From a young age, he gravitated toward the animals that were the heart of the circus. Bengal tigers, with their striking orange coats and fierce presence, became his specialty. Over the years, he developed a deep understanding of the tiger's behavior, earning a reputation as a skilled and courageous trainer. His acts emphasized both the tiger's incredible power and the trust built between human and beast, creating a show that left audiences awestruck. The Suarez Brothers Circus was one of the last traditional circuses in Mexico to feature live animals, a practice that had faced increasing scrutiny worldwide. Despite the controversy, the circus remained a beloved institution in Echogoja, and the performances consistently drew large crowds. That February evening, the tent was packed with families, their children's faces lighting up with excitement as the show began. The audience cheered as acrobats, clowns, and other performers took the stage, preparing the scene for Alexander's grand act with the tigers. When Alexander stepped into the ring, he was accompanied by 2 Bengal tigers. The animals moved with controlled elegance, their muscular bodies reflecting the harsh glow of the stage lights. The act began with a well-rehearsed routine. Alexander jogged in circles around the tigers, cueing them to spin on low platforms. The synchronization between the trainer and the animals was mesmerizing, a witness to their countless hours of practice. The audience watched in amazement, their cheers and applause resounding through the tent. But in an instant, the controlled atmosphere disappeared. One of the 450-pound tigers abruptly stopped its spin and turned toward Alexander. Without hesitation, the tiger lunged, knocking him to the ground with its immense weight. Gasps erupted from the crowd as the tiger clamped its powerful jaws around Alexander's legs, dragging him across the ring. The other tiger remained still, its eyes fixed on the commotion as chaos unfolded. Circus staff rushed into the ring, wielding metal stands to try to separate the tiger from Alexander. They struck the tiger repeatedly, but the animal's grip did not loosen. The audience, initially unsure if the attack was part of the act, quickly realized the gravity of the situation. Screams filled the air as parents grabbed their children, fleeing toward the exits. The joy and excitement that had filled the tent just moments earlier gave way to panic and chaos. As the staff continued their efforts, the tiger attacked again, this time sinking its teeth into Alexander's neck. The trainer lay motionless on the sawdust-covered floor, his body battered and bloodied. The once vibrant atmosphere of the circus had turned into a scene of horror, with the audience scrambling to escape and the staff desperately trying to save their colleague. Finally, the tiger released Alexander and was forced back into its enclosure, but the damage had already been done. Alexander was rushed to a nearby hospital in Huatabambo, where medical personnel worked tirelessly to save his life. The injuries were severe. Deep puncture wounds to his neck and legs, massive blood loss, and internal trauma. Despite their best efforts, Alexander succumbed to his injuries shortly after arriving at the hospital. Word of the tragedy traveled quickly, rippling through the local community and beyond. In the days following the attack, authorities launched an investigation into the incident. Inspectors confirmed that the Suarez Brothers Circus held valid permits for its 11 Bengal tigers and other exotic animals. However, the attack reignited debates about the ethics and safety of using wild animals in performances. Critics pointed to the inherent risks of working with such powerful creatures, even under the most controlled circumstances. Animal rights groups called for an end to live animal acts, arguing that these performances endangered both the animals and the humans who worked with them. The Suarez Brothers Circus continued its tour, but the memory of that night cast a shadow over every performance. The tragedy lingered with the Suarez Brothers' name, transforming what was once a source of joy and wonder into a gruesome reminder of the dangers lurking behind the spectacle. The circus community mourned the loss of Alexander, a man who had dedicated his life to the art and to the animals he worked with. It was a humid evening in rural Bangladesh as dusk settled over the small village where Hashmat Ali had spent most of his life. The quiet night was alive with the soft hum of insects and the distant calls of animals echoing from the nearby Sunbarans forest. The forest, dense and foreboding, was home to countless creatures, but none were more feared than the Bengal tiger. Known for its unmatched power and lethal strength, the tiger commanded both reverence and fear. In Ali's village, stories of tiger attacks circulated often. While some dismiss these tales as exaggerations or rare occurrences, the villagers knew to remain cautious. They lived at the edge of a wilderness ruled by this apex predator. Hashmat Ali had spent all of his 40 years in this village, leading to a solitary life apart from the other villagers. The reasons for his isolation traced back 20 years to a night he could never forget. At 18, Ali had been responsible for providing for himself and his family. With few job options available, he turned to fishing and foraging, a tough but rewarding way to make a living. While he was familiar with the challenges of fishing, foraging for honey presented an entirely different ordeal. The bees, relentless in defending their hives, often left him covered in stings, yet it was a livelihood he endured without complaint. One evening, Ali set out on a multi-day fishing trip. Alongside a small group of local fishermen, he pushed his weathered boat off the shore and guided it carefully through the familiar twists and turns of the river. The boat, his trusted companion on countless journeys, creaked softly under the weight of the day's catch. Hours passed as they worked the waters, catching just enough to sustain their business. Ali even managed to gather honey from a hive near the riverbank, a valuable addition to their haul. By nightfall, exhaustion weighed heavily on him, and as darkness cloaked the river, he lay down on the boat's worn wooden boards to sleep off his fatigue. But as he drifted off, an unseen presence lingered nearby. Ali was not alone. From the underbrush near the water's edge, two gleaming eyes watched him, silent and calculating. A Bengal tiger crouched in the shadows, its muscular body tensed as it observed the lone figure on the boat. Shrouded by the cover of night, the tiger slipped into the water, gliding almost soundlessly toward the unsuspecting fisherman. The river concealed its approach, its golden eyes locked on Ali, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Ali's rest was shattered by a sudden, searing pain. The tiger leaped onto the boat, its claws raking across his face with brutal precision, slicing through skin and muscle. Before he could react, the pain surged sharp and intense through his body. His hands flew to his face, the wet warmth of blood soaking his fingers as they traced the deep gashes where flesh had been torn away. The attack was swift and merciless. The tiger's weight pinned Ali down, its claws tearing at his clothing as it tried to drag him overboard, his vision blurring as waves of pain overwhelmed him. The blood streamed from the wounds on his face, soaking through his shirt as the tiger's grip tightened. The once quiet night had erupted into chaos, with Ali's muffled gasps the only sound piercing the darkness. The commotion drew the attention of his crew, resting in another boat nearby. They rushed over only to be confronted by a nightmarish scene. Ali lay half-slumped in the boat, his hands pressed against his torn face while the tiger's powerful form loomed over him. Blood stained the wooden planks and the air was thick with a metallic scent. The crew shouted, their voices echoing across the water as they frantically tried to make noise, desperate to drive the tiger away. The tiger hesitated, its ears flicking backward in agitation at the sudden uproar. In a sudden burst of fury, the crew began slapping the sides of the boat with their oars, creating a cacophony that startled the predator. The tiger loosened its grip on Ali's clothing and, with a final growl, vanished into the night. The river felt silent once more. The only sounds, the gentle lapping of water and Ali's shallow, labored breaths. Ali's injuries were beyond devastating. The tiger's claws had left his face brutally mangled, with deep, jagged wounds tearing through flesh and bone, a grim testament to the unforgiving force of nature. His co-workers, desperate to save him, rushed him to the nearest hospital. The wooden boat creaked under the strain of their frantic paddling as they raced against time. Once there, Ali was brought to a small clinic where a doctor worked tirelessly under the dim light of an oil lamp, fighting to keep him alive. The doctor labored for hours to stop the bleeding and close the wounds, stitching his torn flesh together as best as he could. Miraculously, Ali survived, but the attack left him with deep physical and emotional scars that would shape the rest of his life. After the attack, Ali withdrew from the outside world, spending most of his time at his home. He felt a deep sense of shame in the presence of his family and friends, fearing his appearance brought them embarrassment. When he ventured out, he hid his face behind a cloth, avoiding the judgmental eyes of strangers. Despite his hardships, Ali's determination never wavered. Over the years, he saved every penny he could to afford reconstructive surgeries. While the procedures couldn't fully restore his face, they brought him closer to a sense of normalcy. For the first time in decades, he was able to show his face without hesitation, finally shedding the cloth that had hidden him for so long. His scars, though still visible, stood as a powerful reminder of his resilience and the strength it took to move forward. The Kruger National Park in South Africa spans nearly 2 million hectares of wilderness, a vast sanctuary where lions roam freely, elephants traverse ancient paths, and leopards lurk in the shadows of acacia trees. For the Baker family from Seattle, Washington, this iconic landscape represented the culmination of years of dreaming and months of planning. Robert Baker, a 42-year-old software engineer, his wife Jennifer, a 39-year-old elementary school teacher, and their 10-year-old son Tyler had saved for 3 years to afford this once-in-a-lifetime adventure. On July 17, 2023, the Bakers rose before dawn at their lodge on the outskirts of Kruger. The air was crisp, carrying the earthy scent of the African bush as they climbed into the open-sided safari vehicle. Their guide, Sipho Nkosi, a veteran ranger with 15 years of experience navigating the unpredictable wilderness of Kruger, greeted them with a warm smile. The morning game drive began with a safety briefing emphasizing the critical importance of remaining seated, keeping all limbs inside the vehicle, and never attempting to touch or feed the animals. As the sun crested the horizon, painting the savanna in hues of amber and gold, the Bakers marveled at the landscape unfolding before them. Herds of impala grazed peacefully, their slender forms silhouetted against the rising sun. A family of elephants ambled across the road, the matriarch pausing to regard the vehicle with intelligent eyes before leading her herd into the bush. For the first 2 hours, the safari exceeded every expectation the Bakers had nurtured during their years of anticipation. Jennifer, an amateur photographer, had invested in a new Canon EOS R5 specifically for this trip. She captured stunning images of giraffes stretching their necks toward acacia branches, zebras creating living optical illusions with their striking patterns, and a pride of lions lounging in the morning sun, their golden eyes half closed in contentment. Each sighting elicited gasps of wonder from Tyler, whose face glowed with the pure joy of witnessing these magnificent creatures in their natural habitat. By mid-morning, the safari vehicle had ventured into a more remote section of the park, where the vegetation grew thicker and the wildlife more elusive. Sipho received a radio call from another guide who had spotted a leopard near the Sabi River, approximately 10 minutes from their current position. Leopards are among the most elusive of the Big Five, and sightings are considered rare treasures even for seasoned safari-goers. The Bakers' excitement mounted as Sipho navigated the dusty roads toward the reported location. Upon arrival, they joined 2 other safari vehicles positioned at a respectful distance from a magnificent male leopard. The predator was draped across the low-hanging branch of a marula tree, its spotted coat gleaming in dappled sunlight, powerful limbs dangling languidly on either side of the branch. At approximately 70 kilograms, the leopard represented the perfect combination of lethal power and feline grace. Its amber eyes surveyed the vehicles with apparent indifference, occasionally closing in slow, confident blinks. The Bakers watched in awe, their voices hushed despite being inside the vehicle. Jennifer raised her camera, capturing frame after frame of the magnificent predator. Through her telephoto lens, she could see the individual spots on the leopard's coat, the whiskers twitching slightly in the breeze, the powerful muscles rippling beneath its fur with each subtle movement. But the distance and the angle of the vehicle meant that the branches partially obscured her perfect shot. After 20 minutes of observation, one of the other vehicles departed, creating an opportunity for Sipho to reposition their vehicle for a better vantage point. He carefully maneuvered to a spot approximately 15 feet from the tree, cutting the engine to minimize disturbance. The leopard remained on its perch, seemingly unperturbed by the vehicle's movement. Its tail swayed hypnotically, occasionally flicking with greater emphasis, a subtle warning sign that experienced guides recognize, but tourists often misinterpret as playfulness. Jennifer continued photographing, but frustration began to build as she reviewed her images. The window frame of the safari vehicle created a dark border in her shots, and the protective mesh screen designed to prevent exactly the tragedy that would soon unfold slightly blurred her otherwise perfect images. The leopard shifted its position, stretching its magnificent form along the branch, presenting an even more spectacular pose. In that moment, Jennifer made the decision that would cost her her life. Despite the explicit safety briefing and the clearly posted warnings throughout the vehicle, she quietly moved the mesh screen aside just enough to position her camera lens through the opening. The action took less than 3 seconds, a momentary lapse in judgment driven by the desire for the perfect photograph. The change was immediate. The leopard's posture transformed from relaxed to alert. Its ears swiveled forward to focus on the new opening in what had previously registered as a single harmless entity. Predators in Kruger have learned to ignore safari vehicles as non-threatening objects, but the absence of the security mesh changes the equation, revealing the vulnerable human occupants inside. Sifo noticed Jennifer's vulnerable position and the leopard's changed demeanor simultaneously. His hand moved toward the ignition, intending to start the engine and create noise to deter any potential aggression. But the leopard moved with the explosive speed that makes these predators so lethal in the wild. In a blur of spotted fur and rippling muscle, the leopard launched from the branch, covering the 15 feet distance to the vehicle in a series of bounds that defied human reaction time. It landed on the vehicle's side with precision, one paw hooking the window frame, the other reaching through the opening to sink razor-sharp claws into Jennifer's shoulder. The force of the impact knocked Jennifer sideways into Robert, who instinctively wrapped protective arms around Tyler. The leopard's jaws found Jennifer's neck, powerful canines designed for delivering a killing bite to prey animals now puncturing human flesh. Blood sprayed across the interior of the vehicle as the predator attempted to drag Jennifer through the window opening. A leopard's jaws can generate over 300 to 400 pounds of pressure per square inch, enough force to effortlessly crush the skull of a baboon or pierce the thick hide of an antelope. For a human, it's nothing less than deadly. Sifo reacted with the speed and decisiveness of an experienced ranger. He started the engine and accelerated sharply, simultaneously reaching for the emergency air horn mounted on the dashboard. The sudden movement and the blaring horn momentarily confused the leopard, causing it to release its grip just enough for Sifo to create distance between the vehicle and the predator. But the damage had been done. Jennifer slumped against the seat, her neck catastrophically injured, blood pumping from severed arteries. Robert pressed his jacket against the wounds, his hands trembling as he attempted to stem the bleeding. Tyler sat frozen in horror, his young mind struggling to process the sudden transformation of their dream vacation into a nightmare. Sifo radioed for emergency assistance while driving at maximum safe speed toward the nearest park gate, where a medical evacuation team was scrambled. Despite their rapid response and Robert's desperate efforts to keep pressure on the wounds, Jennifer Baker was pronounced dead upon arrival at the Skukuza Medical Facility. The official cause of death was a sanguination, from multiple lacerations to the carotid artery and jugular vein. The incident sent shockwaves through Kruger National Park and the wider safari tourism industry. An investigation confirmed that all proper safety protocols had been in place and that Sifo had conducted a thorough safety briefing. The tragedy was attributed solely to Jennifer's decision to open the window, a violation of the most fundamental safari safety rule. The leopard was not tracked or euthanized following the incident. Park authorities emphasized that the animal had behaved according to its natural instincts and posed no unusual threat to properly conducted safari operations. The Baker family's tragedy served as a sobering reminder of the wild nature of Kruger's inhabitants and the critical importance of respecting safari guidelines. Robert and Tyler Baker returned to Seattle a week later, forever changed by their experience. In the months that followed, Robert became an advocate for safari safety, establishing a foundation in Jennifer's name dedicated to educating tourists about the importance of following wildlife viewing protocols. Today, guides in Kruger National Park often include the Baker incident in their safety briefings, a stark illustration of how quickly a dream safari can transform into a nightmare when the thin barrier between humans and wild predators is breached. The story serves as a powerful reminder that in the African wilderness, even a moment's lapse in judgment can lead to a terrifying end. Mrs. Baker's reckless mistake cost her everything. A split-second decision turning a thrilling safari into a brutal, blood-soaked tragedy. But at least she saw her killer coming. The heart of Africa is an unbounded, otherworldly place. A land where every shadow hints at hidden predators, and the horizon stretches wide and wild. This was where Lily Craig, a 28-year-old adventure vlogger from Seattle, found herself ready to capture the thrill of the unknown. Raised in the misty forest of the Pacific Northwest, Lily grew up with a deep love for nature, one that had driven her across the globe in search of extraordinary landscapes and untamed wildlife. Her followers watched as she navigated remote jungles, climbed sheer mountain faces, and swam alongside whale sharks, all for that one perfect shot. But Africa held a special allure. This would be her first time face-to-face with lions in the wild. The Masai Mara, with its sprawling savanna and golden plains, seemed worlds away from Lily's Seattle roots. This African adventure felt like the ultimate chapter in her journey as a vlogger, a chance to immerse her audience in a world both beautiful and untamed. So, as the safari vehicle rumbled along the dirt tracks of the Mara, she leaned out, trying to capture the lions resting just beyond the tall grass, their powerful forms softened by the late afternoon sun. Beside her, the other tourists watched, captivated by the same raw majesty that held her attention. The guide halted the vehicle near a pride lounging by an acacia tree, bathed in the amber glow of the setting sun. As Lily adjusted her camera to capture the perfect angle, her excitement overruled her caution. She stepped down from the vehicle, hoping to get closer to the pride for a better shot. Distracted by her camera, she misses the quiet warning from the guide, focused only on her lens and the lions ahead. Then, in one misplaced step, she stumbled down a small incline, her foot slipping on the loose, dry earth. Her camera flew from her grip, capturing her fall and the startled lions as she tumbled. Before she could right herself, the ground seemed to vibrate. A massive male lion, alerted by her sudden movements, had fixed its gaze on her. In that instant, the lion charged, its muscular frame cutting across the savanna with breathtaking speed. Lily barely had time to scream as it closed the distance between them, each bound bringing her face to face with the apex predator she had long admired from a distance. It reached her in seconds, swiping at her with a massive paw and knocking her backward. Pain surged through her as she struggled to shield herself from its powerful strikes. The guide, Mashina, saw the attack unfold and wasted no time. He sprang from the vehicle, shouting and waving his arms, trying to divert the lion's attention. His voice rang out across the savanna, a primal cry that finally made the lion pause. Eyes locked on Mashina, the lion hesitated, shifting its focus just long enough for Lily to scramble to her feet, trembling and disoriented. She staggered back toward the safari vehicle, clutching her side, her mind reeling from the near-fatal encounter. Mashina stood firm, maintaining eye contact with the lion, his hands raised in a stance of dominance. For what felt like an eternity, they faced off, the lion seemingly torn between retreat and attack. But finally, with a low growl, it backed away, returning to the pride. Mashina kept his gaze locked on the lion until it slowly retreated into the grass, its interest waning. He hurried back to the vehicle, finding Lily pressed against her seat, her face pale and her breathing shallow. Bruises had already begun to form where the lion had struck her, darkening across her chest and arms. The other passengers looked on in stunned silence, the gravity of what they'd witnessed sinking in as the driver turned the vehicle back toward camp at top speed, maneuvering quickly but carefully over the rough terrain. Back at the camp, the staff were prepared. A nurse and other team members met them as soon as the vehicle rolled to a stop, guiding Lily to a makeshift medical area where they could assess her injuries. The nurse checked her pulse and applied cold compresses to her bruises, offering water and keeping her comfortable as she recovered. Staff members gathered quietly nearby, some calling local medical services to ensure additional care was available if needed. Over the next few days, Lily stayed at the camp, resting and regaining her strength under the watchful care of the staff. She spent time with Machina discussing the attack and how quickly the situation had escalated. They talked over the incident, reflecting on the importance of following safety protocols in the wild, and Machina took the opportunity to emphasize how easily nature's most powerful predators could react with deadly force. The safari company took the incident seriously, reviewing safety measures for all guests and implementing new rules to ensure closer supervision during excursions. Guides were given clear instructions to enforce strict policies about staying inside vehicles near wildlife, especially around big cats. With new briefings added before each trip, they worked to make sure tourists fully understood the dangers of venturing too close to Africa's powerful predators. When Lily eventually returned home, she shared the story of her near miss with her online audience, deciding to end her social media career with a warning to her followers. Nature, as breathtaking as it is, remains ultimately wild and not for our frivolous human entertainment, but is owed the utmost respect. Those who venture too close may find themselves on the wrong side of its raw, untamed power. On the morning of March 23, 2024, the sun had just begun to cast its golden light over the snow-covered woods of Georgetown, California. The air was crisp and the silence of the wilderness wrapped around two brothers as they made their way deeper into the forest. Talon and Wyatt Brooks were no strangers to these woods, having spent countless hours hunting and camping here since they were children. Their father, a seasoned outdoorsman, had taught them not only how to track and hunt, but also how to survive in the wild, lessons that had shaped them into skilled hunters. That morning, the brothers set out on an expedition to collect shed antlers and hunt wild boar, a task they looked forward to each year. It was early spring, and while the land was still cloaked in snow, the boars were plentiful, and the antlers lay scattered among the trees. With their backpacks filled with supplies and a bond that only years of shared brotherly experiences could create, they ventured into the wilderness, unaware of the danger that lay ahead. The campsite they chose was familiar, tucked away just off the road where they could camp under the thick canopy of pine trees. They spent the afternoon setting up their camp, joking and laughing as they prepared for a quiet night under the stars. Dinner was a simple affair, cooked over an open flame with enough food to last them through the night. Though their father wasn't with them on this trip, the brothers were more than capable of handling themselves. It wasn't the first time they had ventured out alone. After eating, the brothers set out to hunt, knowing that the boars would be active as the sun began to set. Within a couple of hours, they had successfully downed one boar and found a few prime antlers to collect. They spent the rest of the afternoon dressing the boar and hauling it back to camp. Unbeknownst to the brothers, the smell of the hunt, a mix of fresh meat and blood, carried through the forest, leaving an open invitation to any predators in the area. As the night fell, the brothers cleaned up at a nearby stream, then retired to their tent to sleep, unaware that the aftermath of their hunt had drawn the attention of a hungry cougar. The beast had been prowling the area, its sharp eyes catching the scent of the carcass. It had waited until darkness settled, slipping into the shadows near the camp. The faint sounds of the brothers' voices and the warmth of the fire were enough to make the cat hesitant. but the hunger gnawing at its belly urged it forward. The cougar had lingered in the woods all night, watching the camp from a distance, its instincts driving it closer and closer to the prize. But when Wyatt stepped out of the tent in the early morning to relieve himself, the predator saw its chance. Stealthily, it crept through the underbrush, closing in on the unsuspecting brothers. Talon and Wyatt had no idea they were being stalked. As they made their way back toward the woods, the cougar remained silent, moving stealthily in the shadows. The brothers, focused on the path ahead, noticed nothing unusual. But then, in a split second, the cougar leapt from its hiding place, its powerful body crashing into Wyatt. With deadly precision, it raked its claws across his face, leaving deep gashes that tore through flesh and bone. Wyatt screamed in pain, but before he could react, the cougar was on top of him, its teeth sinking into his cheek and neck. Talon, who had been just a step ahead, rushed to his brother's aid. He threw down his rifle and, with the strength of desperation, lunged at the beast. His body collided with the cougar, knocking it off his brother and sending it tumbling through the air. In the chaos, Talon shouted at Wyatt to run. Blood poured from his brother's face and his left eye was all but lost. Stumbling, disoriented and half blind, Wyatt ran for the camp, leaving a trail of blood in the snow behind him. In his panic, he managed to grab a phone and dial 911, though his hands were slick with his own blood and his vision blurred. Talon fought with the mountain lion, trying to keep it away from his brother, but his efforts were in vain. The cougar, furious and afraid, attacked again, its claws slicing through his body with terrifying force. Talon's cries filled the air as he tried to fight back, but the lion's grip was relentless. Within moments, Talon was on the ground, unable to protect himself from the creature's savage assault. The lion tore into his throat, silencing him forever. Wyatt reached the camp, finally managing to speak to the 911 operator before he passed out from shock and blood loss. The paramedics arrived moments later, but it was too late for Talon. They found him just a few feet from the camp, his body mangled beyond recognition. The cougar had been standing over him, feasting on its prey when the officers arrived. They fired their shots, driving the lion back into the trees, but it was clear that Talon was already gone. The cougar was eventually tracked down and euthanized. Its stomach revealed the horrifying signs of its predation, with blood still fresh on its muzzle. Wyatt, though gravely injured, was rushed to the hospital. The surgeons worked to save what they could of his face, though his injuries were severe. Wyatt was expected to recover, though his appearance would forever be altered by the brutal attack. On a frosty March morning in 2019, the small Czech village of Zidikov stirred to life beneath a pale winter sky. Nestled in the Moravian Silesian countryside, this quiet town was surrounded by snow-dusted hills and thick forests. It was the kind of place where neighbors exchanged friendly nods, and life moved at a slower pace. But beneath the calm of that frosty morning, a predator's cage held the beginnings of a tragedy, one that would leave blood in the snow and the village forever haunted by what escaped. Michael Prasek, a 33-year-old resident of Zidikov, was a man of contradictions. To many in the village, he was a mystery, both reclusive and friendly, deeply passionate but fiercely stubborn. He lived with his father in their modest family home on the edge of town, where he had turned their property into an unusual sanctuary for exotic animals. His fascination with wildlife had become an obsession in 2016 when he acquired Fufi, a young male lion. 2 years later, he purchased a lioness, adding Cleopatra to his collection and setting his sights on breeding the animals. Neighbors were uneasy from the start. Lions, after all, were not typical residents of the Moravian countryside. Concerns grew as the animals matured into powerful predators, each weighing more than 400 pounds. Fufi's deep roars echoed through the village at night, and Cleopatra's agile, muscular frame prowled behind the bars of her cage. Despite warnings from locals and even his own family, Michael insisted he had everything under control. For Michael, these lions were more than pets, they were his life's purpose. Every day he devoted hours to caring for them, hauling crates of meat to their enclosures, and meticulously maintaining their cages. He believed he understood them better than anyone, often telling others they were part of his family. But Michael's confidence blinded him to danger. Over time, his bond with the lions became a source of tension with neighbors and authorities alike. In 2018, Michael made national headlines after a shocking incident involving Cleopatra. On a summer afternoon, he decided to walk the lioness on a leash near his property. The sight of the enormous predator on a public road sent a cyclist crashing into her. Though no one was seriously injured, the incident amplified fears in the village and brought renewed scrutiny from local officials. Michael was fined for keeping the lions without proper permits, but enforcement proved difficult. Sanctuaries for larger predators were overcrowded, and the cost of relocating the animals was prohibitive. With no clear solution, Michael was allowed to keep the lions, much to the frustration of his neighbors. By March 2019, tensions surrounding Michael's lions had reached a boiling point. His father, who lived with him, repeatedly warned him of the risks. His sisters, who had once visited regularly, avoided the property entirely, fearing for their children's safety. But Michael remained defiant, convinced that his understanding of Fufi and Cleopatra set him apart from the others. On the morning of March 4th, the Moravian countryside was cloaked in frost, the air sharp and biting. Michael began his day as he always did, feeding the lions. Carrying a bucket of fresh meat, he trudged through the snow toward the enclosures. The sight of Fufi pacing behind the bars didn't faze him. This routine had become second nature. Unlocking the gate, Michael stepped inside the male lion's cage, entirely at ease, despite the imposing predator just feet away. He placed the bucket on the ground and turned to tend to the other tasks, never imagining the danger lurking in that moment. Fufi, now a fully grown and dominant male lion, moved with the power and speed of a predator honed by millennia of evolution. The moment Michael turned his back, the lion's instincts took over. Fufi lunged, his massive stride covering the distance in a single bound, and his lethal paw struck Michael square in the chest. The impact knocked Michael off his feet, sending him sprawling to the ground, dazed and unable to defend himself. Pinned beneath the monstrous predator, Michael was defenseless as Fufi delivered a second fatal strike. The lion's massive jaws clamped down around Michael's neck, severing arteries and cutting off his ability to cry for help. Blood stained the snow as Fufi's predatory instincts took over entirely, reducing Michael to nothing more than prey. The commotion drew the attention of Cleopatra the lioness, who quickly joined the frenzy. She moved with lethal precision as she sank her teeth into Michael's lifeless form. The pair of lions worked together with brutal efficiency, tearing at their keeper with the same ferocity they would show to prey in the wild. In mere moments, Michael's life was extinguished and his body was left unrecognizable under the combined force of the two beasts. When Michael's father arrived the next morning, alarmed by his son's lack of response to calls, he was met with a chilling sight. Fufi was pacing the enclosure, his golden eyes fixed on what remained of Michael's body, now reduced to little more than scattered remains in the snow. Cleopatra lay nearby, her head resting on her paws, her massive presence almost serene. At first, Michael's father thought his son was asleep, but as he approached the gate, the gruesome truth became clear. Panicked and grief-stricken, Michael's father retreated and called the authorities. Police arrived shortly after, armed and prepared for the worst. To recover Michael's remains safely, they had no choice but to euthanize both lions. Fufi, still aggressive, charged at the responders and was shot on sight. Cleopatra, though calmer, was also euthanized shortly after. The family's property, once bustling with life, now stood empty and silent. The aftermath of Michael's death was a flurry of drama in the village and beyond. Animal rights activists condemned the killing of the lions, arguing that they were acting on instinct and should not have been kept in captivity to begin with. Others blamed Michael's stubbornness and criticized the lax enforcement of regulations that had allowed the situation to spiral out of control. For Michael's family, the loss was overwhelming. His father, unable to bear the memories of what had happened, moved away from Zidikov, leaving the house and its empty cages to decay. Over time, the property fell into disrepair, overgrown with weeds and shrouded in silence. The rusting cages and abandoned enclosures remained as a haunting reminder of the risks of keeping wild animals in captivity. For over 3 decades, Marco Valentini had been the undisputed star of the magnificent Mondial Circus. A legend, a spectacle, a man who seemed to possess an almost mystical bond with the most dangerous big cats in the world. Across America, he was known as the Lion King, commanding 5 full-grown African lions through daring stunts that left audiences breathless. But even kings grow old. At 58, Marco was past his prime, though he refused to acknowledge it. His body bore the marks of a life spent inches from death. His weathered face, deeply lined from years under the harsh circus lights, was framed by a jagged scar that stretched from his left eye to his jaw, a brutal souvenir from an early career mistake. Yet, in the posters, in the flashing cameras, in the eyes of the crowd, he was still Marco Valentini, the unbreakable beast tamer. The times were changing, and so was the world's view of men like him. The golden age of animal acts was fading under a tide of controversy, and yet, wherever the circus traveled, Marco's show remained the centerpiece. And at the heart of it all was Rex. Rex was magnificent, a 550-pound powerhouse. His mane dark as midnight, his amber eyes cold and unreadable. He was the face of the circus, his image plastered across billboards, flyers, and every piece of merchandise the magnificent Mondial could sell. But behind the scenes, the lion that had once been Marco's greatest triumph was turning into his greatest threat. For months now, something had changed. Rex had begun challenging Marco, not in the playful, manageable way young lions sometimes tested authority, but with a slow, simmering defiance. In training sessions, his movements were delayed, his growls deeper, his eyes filled with something Marco had not seen in years. Twice in the past month, handlers had been forced to intervene when Rex refused to back down, his posture rigid, his tail flicking in warning. The circus veterinarian was the first to voice what Marco refused to acknowledge. Rex was showing signs of stress, unpredictable, agitated. She strongly recommended pulling him from the act before something went wrong. Marco dismissed the warning, brushing off the concern with irritation. To him, Rex was just being a lion. He had dismissed her concerns with a wave of his hand, brushing off the nervous whispers of the younger trainers. They didn't understand. He had spent a lifetime in the ring with beasts that could tear him apart. He knew their language. Rex wasn't dangerous, he just needed to remember who was in charge. Marco dismissed the vet's concerns, confident in his decades of experience. To him, Rex only needed a firmer hand. But even kings can lose their thrones, and the next time Marco stepped into the ring, he would never step out again. On the evening of July 15, 2018, the magnificent Mondial Circus had set up its grand tent in Tampa, Florida. It was the opening night of a 2-week engagement, and the tent was filled to capacity with nearly 2,000 spectators. The air was thick with the smell of popcorn, cotton candy, and the unmistakable musk of the big cats. Marco's act was scheduled as the finale before intermission. As the ringmaster announced the Lion King and his royal court, spotlights swept across the arena to reveal Marco standing proudly in his signature gold-trimmed costume. 5 lions entered the ring through a tunnel, with Rex leading the procession. The first half of the performance unfolded like a well-rehearsed symphony, every movement choreographed to perfection. The lions leaped effortlessly through the rings of fire, their sleek muscles rippling under the blinding stage lights. They balanced on towering pedestals, roared on command, and moved in eerie synchronization, a testament to Marco's legendary control. The crowd was mesmerized, entranced by the display of raw power and calculated risk. When the four lions took their designated places on the elevated platforms, framing the ring like statues of ancient gods, the atmosphere was electric. Anticipation crackled in the air. It was time for the grand finale, Marco's most dangerous, most awe-inspiring stunt, the act that had cemented his legacy, the one where he placed his head inside the jaws of Rex. As Marco signaled for the final act, Rex rose to his full height, nearly 10 feet of sheer muscle and untamed power. His mane, thick and wild, framed his face like the crown of a king reclaiming his throne. But something was wrong. His tail flicked, a warning. His ears pressed back, a threat. The powerful muscles beneath his tawny coat tensed like coiled steel, his breathing deeper, slower. The crowd saw none of this, but Marco did. For a fleeting second, a shadow of doubt passed over his face, a brief hesitation, the slightest pause. But he was Marco Valentini, and Marco Valentini did not falter. He lifted his arms in his signature flourish, soaking in the waves of applause. And then, in a move that had been rehearsed hundreds of times before, he turned his back to Rex for just a moment, just long enough to bask in his audience's admiration. That moment was all it took. A deep, guttural snarl cut through the air like a blade. Before the sound even reached the back rows, Rex moved. It was a blur of raw primal instinct, the perfect predator striking with terrifying precision. The lion dropped to all fours in a single fluid motion and lunged. Marco never had a chance. The impact was devastating, the force of 550 pounds slamming into him like a wrecking ball. He was ripped off his feet, sent sprawling face down into the sawdust, the wind knocked from his lungs before he even realized what had happened. The crowd gasped, some still convinced this was part of the act. Then came the sound that silenced the world, a sickening crunch as Rex's massive jaws clamped down on the back of Marco's neck. A few people screamed, others sat frozen in horror, their minds struggling to process what they were witnessing. And then, just like that, the Lion King was no more. Marco's assistants rushed into the ring with fire extinguishers and electric prods, but their intervention only seemed to enrage Rex further. The other four lions, sensing the chaos, became agitated and began roaring and pacing on their platforms. As handlers attempted to drive Rex away from Marco, the lion dragged the tamer's limp body toward the center of the ring. With one powerful motion, Rex shook Marco like a rag doll, the sound of breaking bones audible even over the screams of the audience. Parents covered their children's eyes as security personnel evacuated the tent. Emergency responders waited at the perimeter, unable to enter, while Rex stood guard over Marco's body, challenging anyone who approached. It took nearly 20 minutes and multiple tranquilizer darts before Rex finally collapsed, allowing medical personnel to reach Marco. By then, it was far too late. Marco Valentini, the Lion King, had suffered catastrophic injuries to his spine and throat. He was pronounced dead at the scene, his final performance ending in a tragedy before a horrified audience. In the days following the attack, investigations revealed numerous safety violations within the magnificent Mondial Circus. Records showed that Rex had been involved in 3 previous incidents that had been covered up by management. Former employees came forward with stories of mistreatment and dangerous conditions for both animals and performers. Animal welfare organizations used the tragedy to push for legislation banning wild animal acts in circuses. Within months, Florida passed Marco's Law, prohibiting the use of big cats in traveling shows. The remaining lions from Marco's act, including Rex, were transferred to a sanctuary in Tennessee where they would live out their days without performing. The magnificent Mondial Circus never recovered from the incident. Attendance plummeted, and within a year, the once prestigious show closed permanently. The iconic red and gold tent that had housed generations of performers was sold at auction, marking the end of an era. Marco Valentini had spent his life commanding the respect of the world's most dangerous predators, but in the end it was Rex who delivered the final verdict. A brutal reminder that the king of the jungle will always be more powerful than any self-proclaimed Lion King. It was April 2017, and 12-year-old Christian Prinsloo, known as Tian to his friends and family, was enjoying his school holiday in the South African countryside. As the 2-week break began, Tian made his way to his grandmother's home near Lefalale, a quiet town on the edge of the Bushveld. It was a time of adventure for him, a chance to escape the routine of everyday life. Little did he know, this trip would end in a tragedy that no one could have predicted. Tian's grandmother, Mary Strydom, had a home nestled in the heart of South Africa's wild landscapes. The area was known for its sprawling farms, vast open fields, and the occasional wild animal sighting. Mary had lived there for years, deeply connected to the land and the tight-knit farming community. It was a place where Tian had spent many holidays, surrounded by the peace and beauty of rural life. He enjoyed the quiet days spent exploring the area, reading in the local library, and visiting nearby farms to see the animals. But there was one place Tian particularly loved to visit, a farm where his family friends, the Voss couple, raised lions. They were a quiet but dedicated couple who ran a breeding facility for these majestic and dangerous animals. They kept 3 adult lions, hand-raised but still wild in their instincts. The Voss couple treated the lions with care and respect, making sure their cages and enclosures were secure. The lions were kept in their enclosures, only allowed to roam the property under the watchful eyes of their owners, or so it was believed. It was on this farm that Tian, accompanied by his grandmother, spent an afternoon chatting with the Voss couple. It was a casual visit, one Tian had made many times before. The lions had already been out for their daily walk and had returned to their enclosures by the time Tian and Marie arrived. As the adults spoke over tea, Tian was oblivious to the danger that was about to unfold. The house was bustling with activity. Mary and Mrs. Voss were in the kitchen while Tian moved about looking for his favorite book. What he didn't know was that, unbeknownst to the adults, one of the lions had escaped its enclosure. A gate, left ajar or improperly closed, had given the lion the opportunity it needed. No one realized the danger until it was too late. In the blink of an eye, the massive male lion appeared in the doorway. Tian, already familiar with the lions but never completely naive about their wild nature, froze. He had always been told the same thing. The lions were not tame despite being raised in captivity. But what could have prepared him for the sight of one of these beasts in the house? Marie saw the lion first and immediately stepped between Tian and the predator, trying to shield her grandson with her own body. The lion, though seemingly calm, locked its eyes on Tian and stepped closer, testing the air. Marie, remaining calm despite the mounting danger, urged Tian to run for safety, but it was too late. Tian turned to flee, and in that split second, the lion sprang into action, covering the distance between them in mere moments. Tian never stood a chance. The lion pounced, its claws digging into Tian's small back, its jaws sinking deep into his flesh. With the speed and force of a wild animal, it took him down to the ground. Tian screamed, but his cries were quickly muffled by the weight of the lion's attack. Marie, with every ounce of strength she had left, lunged at the lion, grabbing its thick mane and pulling with all her might. She screamed, calling for help, but it was a losing battle. The lion swiped at her, raking its claws across her arms and shoulders as she desperately tried to protect her grandson. In the chaos, Mrs. Voss returned to the scene. The lion, momentarily distracted, turned away from Tian. It was a fleeting moment of hope, but the damage was already done. The lion, now subdued by Mrs. Voss, was quickly returned to its enclosure, and she rushed to call for help. Marie, however, did not wait. Despite her own injuries, she grabbed the car keys, tossed them to Mrs. Voss, and picked up Tian. She carried him to the car and sped toward the nearest hospital, knowing time was running out. It took them 20 minutes to reach the hospital, but by the time they arrived, it was clear that Tian's injuries were catastrophic. His back and neck were shredded, his breathing shallow and labored. The doctors did what they could to stabilize him, but it was only a temporary measure. The damage to his spine was severe. Tian was airlifted to Pretoria, where he was transferred to a more equipped facility, but even then, the outlook was grim. For 3 weeks, Tian remained in a coma, his body clinging to life through machines. His parents, Herman and Andre Prinsloo, kept a constant vigil, hoping for a miracle. But the miracle never came. On the 26th of April, just 1 day after his 12th birthday, Tian passed away. His family was left in a state of shock, mourning the loss of their son, who had been full of life and dreams for the future. Meanwhile, the lion, despite the deadly attack, was not euthanized. The Prinsloo family chose not to press charges against the Voss couple, understanding that the lion had acted on instinct, not malice. They made the difficult decision to allow the lion to be rehomed to another facility where it could live out its life in a more secure environment, far from human interaction. The tragedy of Tian's death was something no one could have foreseen, and despite the loss, the family did not wish to punish the animal. In the end, the Prinsloo family's decision reflected their understanding of the unpredictability of nature. While they mourned their son's loss, they knew that it was a tragic accident, one that no amount of legal action could undo. Tian's life was cut short by a series of misfortunes, but his family chose to honor his love for animals by ensuring the lion would be treated with respect in its new home. Despite their domestication, these creatures are still driven by primal instincts that no amount of care or training can suppress. Nature, in its purest form, remains untamable, and even the most careful decisions can lead to tragic consequences. In late April 2018, the Marakele Animal Sanctuary thrived with life, its grounds humming with visitors eager to glimpse its magnificent predators. Nearly 2 decades earlier, Mike Hodge and his wife Chrissy had left behind their lives in Wimslow, Cheshire to pursue their dream of living closer to nature. They arrived in South Africa in 1999, determined to make a difference in wildlife conservation. After years of hard work, they founded the sanctuary in 2010, creating a haven for big cats and a space where people could learn to appreciate these majestic creatures. For Mike, this work was more than a career, it was his calling. A 72-year-old British expat, he saw the sanctuary as the culmination of nearly 2 decades of dedication to these powerful animals. Mike had a reputation as a lion whisperer, a man whose bond with his cats seemed almost otherworldly. But even as he greeted guests and carried out his daily routines, the sanctuary's delicate balance between harmony and danger lingered. One lion in particular embodied this fragile balance: Shamba, a 10-year-old male who weighed nearly 400 pounds. His golden mane caught the sunlight as he paced his enclosure, exuding both grace and raw power. Raised by Mike from a cub, Shamba was known for his intelligence and dominance, traits that left visitors awestruck. Yet, as beautiful as he was, Shamba's primal instincts remained intact. That day, his pacing hinted at an unease no one could yet explain, but it was a sign of the chaos that would soon unfold. The day had begun like any other. Visitors to the sanctuary marveled at the lions from behind the safety of fences as Mike conducted his usual rounds. Among the crowd was Luanzi, a senior staff member and trusted colleague of Mike. He had been leading a group of visitors on a tour of the sanctuary, sharing anecdotes about the lions and their behavior when Shamba's restlessness caught his attention. Concerned, Luanzi excused himself from the group and joined Mike to assess the situation. He was meticulous, ensuring the enclosures were secure and the animals well cared for. But that afternoon, something was amiss. Shamba appeared restless, pacing his enclosure with a deliberate intensity. Perhaps it was the rising temperature or an unseen disturbance, but his agitation didn't go unnoticed. Mike, ever attuned to the behavior of his animals, decided to investigate. It was a decision that would lead him into the lion's den, literally and figuratively. Stepping through the gate into Shamba's enclosure, Mike exuded a calm confidence. He had done this countless times before, trusting in his knowledge and experience to guide him. Shamba watched him closely, his movements measured and deliberate. To the untrained eye, the lion seemed curious, almost calm. But Mike knew better. He spoke to Shamba in a soothing tone, his voice steady as he approached. Yet, even the most seasoned handler can't predict when a predator's instincts will take over. It happened in an instant. As Mike turned his back to leave the enclosure, Shamba's demeanor shifted. The lion's muscles coiled, his body language changing from passive to predatory. Realizing the danger, Mike turned and ran for the gate, but Shamba reacted instantly, closing the distance with terrifying speed. His massive frame propelled him forward as his claws raked across Mike's back, grabbing him by the shoulder and yanking him to the ground. The force was staggering, and within moments, Shamba had dragged Mike further into the enclosure, away from the gate and any hope of immediate rescue. The onlookers froze in horror. Some screamed while others fumbled for their phones to capture the unfolding chaos. The sanctuary staff, trained for emergencies, sprang into action. Luanzi, who had been nearby assisting Mike earlier, immediately stepped in to take control. He shouted instructions to others while banging on the enclosure's outer fences, desperately trying to distract Shamba and draw his attention away from Mike. But the lion's grip was relentless. His primal instincts had taken hold, and in that moment, Mike was no longer a caretaker or a friend. He was prey. Pinned beneath Shamba's immense weight, Mike fought with everything he had. Years of experience had taught him how to stay calm in the face of danger, but the odds were stacked against him. Shamba's teeth sank into Mike's shoulder, the sheer power of his jaws causing searing pain. Blood stained the dry grass, a grim contrast to the golden hues of the afternoon sun. Every second felt like an eternity as the struggle continued, the boundary between life and death growing thinner with each passing moment. Finally, Luanzi made a decisive action, grabbing a rifle he kept for emergencies and fired at Shamba. The shock struck the lion, causing him to release Mike momentarily. Seizing the opportunity, Luanzi and other staff members rushed in, creating a barrier between the lion and his victim. However, the lion's injuries proved fatal shortly after the incident. Mike, bloodied and barely conscious, was dragged to safety. An ambulance was already on its way, but the damage had been done. The aftermath was devastating. Mike was airlifted to Johannesburg Hospital, where doctors worked tirelessly to treat his injuries. He required over 100 stitches to close deep lacerations on his back, arms, and shoulders. His jaw was broken in multiple places, necessitating complex reconstructive surgery, and puncture wounds covered his body, each one a sign of Shamba's immense power. His recovery was long and grueling, marked by excruciating pain and months of physical therapy. Miraculously, he survived, but the emotional scars ran just as deep as the physical ones. Shamba's fate was sealed that day. The decision to euthanize him was not made lightly, but it was deemed necessary to ensure the safety of future visitors and staff. The loss was felt deeply by Mike and his team, a tragic end for a lion they had nurtured for a decade. Shamba's death sparked a wave of public debate, with some questioning the ethics of keeping such powerful animals in captivity, and others defending the sanctuary's mission of conservation and education. For Mike, the incident marked a turning point. The sanctuary temporarily closed but reopened in mid-May 2018, implementing stricter safety protocols, including reinforced enclosures and revised procedures for interacting with the animals. Today, the Marakele Animal Sanctuary continues its work, honoring both the beauty and danger of the creatures it houses. And while the scars from that fateful day remain, so too does Mike's unwavering commitment to the animals he loves. Thanks for watching. For more wild encounters, tap the video on your screen now.